Terraria is a game that involves many things. Building, fighting, mining, grinding for 6 hours straight, fishing, dying to traps.
Oh crap!
But it's also known for having some pretty fun boss fights. Terraria has 18 bosses, not counting mini bosses and events. And in this video, I'll be ranking all 18 bosses from worst to best. Before we begin, let's establish a couple of ground rules so that we're all on the same page. Like I mentioned, we will not be including mini bosses in this video, nor will we be including events like the Goblin Army or the Pirates Invasion. Also, there are some bosses exclusive to certain seeds, as well as bosses exclusive to certain versions of the game. We will only be counting bosses that can be found in a normal Terraria 1.4 seed. As always, this video is entirely subjective and should not be interpreted as objective fact. It's true that I've been playing this game for over 7 years to this point, but I don't claim to be an expert. Another thing I want to mention is that I won't be going super in depth about the bosses, so if you're looking for a major analysis of these boss fights, you won't be finding that here. These rankings will be determined based on several things: how fun is the boss, how well designed is the boss, the items that it gives you once defeated, and so on and so forth. Also, one more thing before we begin, this video is set to release on my birthday, so if you want to be generous, why not help me have a great birthday by leaving a like and sharing this video with friends? It's a small contribution that helps my channel tremendously. Without any further delay, let's move on to the rankings. Coming in at last place, number 18, I chose King Slime. I'm gonna try my best to find at least one compliment for this boss before I'm done talking about it. This boss is pretty pathetic, all things considered. King Slime is a waste of time. Excuse my sudden poetry. It's literally just a big slime with a crown. This thing literally shrinks the more and more damage you do to it, as if it wasn't already easy enough. Maybe I'm being too harsh on the thing. After all, it does drop one half decent item, but it's just a boring boss fight. The only reason I'd get excited over fighting this guy is if I was running low on gel. Otherwise, there's no point. You know what? I finally have a compliment for King Slime. He exists. Yeah, that's the best I can come up with. Anyway, that's why I chose King Slime for number 18. At number 17, I chose Golem. This boss has always been a big pushover and not a fun one either. To find this boss, you must defeat Plantera and use the temple key to get inside the jungle temple. Golem will hop around and punch at you with his long arms. Once Golem reaches second phase, his head will come off and start acting independently. However, his body has zero defense during this phase. This is a late hard mode boss that for some reason is way easier than every other boss surrounding it. Golem did get patched in a recent update, but to what extent, I don't really know, because I haven't personally noticed too much of a difference. It's still the same easy boss. It does have a few good drops, but that's not enough to save it for me. Most people agree that Plantera, the boss you fight right before Golem, is still more of a challenge. Golem just doesn't have a whole lot going for it, and that's why I chose it to be number 17. At number 16, I chose the Lunatic Cultist. This boss is arguably worse than Golem, but I ranked it just ahead because I think the fight itself is a little bit more entertaining, which isn't saying much. However, the biggest issue with this boss is the fact that he basically has no drops. The only thing he drops is a crafting station used for crafting with celestial items. Yeah, he drops a crafting station and that's it. In fact, this boss doesn't even drop a treasure bag in expert or master mode. The moveset isn't terrible or anything. He'll shoot an icicle ball in your direction or disguise himself among clones. It's still just not an interesting fight. The Lunatic Cultist is kinda just a waste of space, and that's always what it'll be known as. You only fight this guy to get to the celestial pillars, that's it. But I think you'll be happy to know that this is the last truly bad boss in this game, but that's why I chose Lunatic Cultist for number 16. At number 15, I chose the Eater of Worlds. Like I said, there won't be any bad bosses going forward, but as for the Eater of Worlds, I'm not a fan of this one. The Eater of Worlds is a very simple boss. The only notable move it has is charging at you. Simple bosses aren't inherently bad, but it's literally just a worm. It is cool how when you split the boss apart, it multiplies, so I guess that helps it retain some form of originality, but it's still kinda just a worm. So this boss is incredibly easy on normal mode, but on expert and master, the boss gets a new ability where it constantly shoots vile spit, and this turns the fight into a pretty big challenge. I honestly dislike how this boss goes from insanely easy to insanely hard. I guess you could say the same for the Eye of Cthulhu, but I don't think that's as bad of a difficulty curve as the Eater of Worlds. Luckily, the expert and master variants of this boss give you an item called the Worm Scarf, which is an amazing accessory, and the Demonite and Shadow Scales this boss gives you are incredibly important for progression. direction. So even though I'm not a huge fan of the boss fight itself, it's still got some great rewards, and I don't think it's a completely terrible fight or anything. So that's why I chose the Eater of Worlds for number 15. Just ahead of Eater of Worlds, at number 14, I chose Brain of Cthulhu. A little bit of context before we begin. I'm sure you already know this, but in Terraria, your world either contains a corruption or a crimson. You can't spawn with both unless you're in a special seed. The Brain of Cthulhu is the crimson boss, whereas the Eater of Worlds is the corruption boss. Originally, I had the Eater of Worlds just ahead of this boss, but after getting footage for this video, I changed my mind about the Brain of Cthulhu. This is a pretty decent boss, all things considered. It's pretty interesting and unique, and the second stage is super original as well. It's still not amazing or anything. It's not that memorable, and it's really easy. The drops are also worse than the Eater of Worlds if you factor in the expert and master mode drops. But all things considered, I think there's some fun to be had with this one, so that's why I chose it to be number 14. At number 13, I chose Deerclops. Deerclops is the most recent boss added to Terraria, but he's been a part of Don't Starve Together for a long time. I haven't played too much of Don't Starve Together, it seems like a hard game to get into, but I have enjoyed the little bit I've played. So this boss originates from another indie game by the name of Don't Starve Together. I haven't fought it in that game, so I guess take my opinion with a grain of salt. I really like this boss, but it's kind of forgettable to be honest. I don't really mean the fight itself. It has a really cool gimmick where you can only do damage if you're close enough, but I just mean that I always forget to fight this guy during my playthroughs. On top of this, the fight is pretty cheesable according to a lot of people. You can grapple in between his legs and he can pretty much do nothing about it. I also never found his drops to be incredibly useful, but I haven't fought this guy a lot, so that might just be me. Either way, the boss fight itself is pretty good, but everything else, I'm not a huge fan. But maybe that's just because I don't really have a connection to the game that this boss is originally from. Either way, that's why I chose Deerclops for number 13. And at number 12, I chose the most iconic boss in Terraria, the Eye of Cthulhu. You may be wondering, why is one of the most basic bosses in Terraria being ranked just above the top 10? Well, the Eye of Cthulhu has so much going for it, and I think we take it for granted. First off, this is the most iconic and recognizable boss in Terraria history, and is one of the reasons this game is so loved by gamers. This is a fantastic starter boss for any game. Sure, it's incredibly easy, but the fight will always be fun. He flies towards your direction and summons servants to aid him. Around halfway into the fight, the eyeball turns into a mouth, and this is where he becomes faster and deadlier. But if you watch your step and move quick enough, you can dodge him while doing massive damage. It's not a difficult fight beyond any stretch of imagination. You can beat him on your first night if you tried. However, the expert and master mode variants of this boss do pack a punch. They're a lot faster, do more damage, and have upgraded second phases. They're still not too bad though. This boss also has a great expert and master mode item called the Shield of Cthulhu, which acts as a weapon that can bash into enemies. I just think this is a great boss fight and people take it for granted. However, while it is iconic and entertaining, it's not as impressive as some of the other fights in this game, so that's why I can't rank it any better than this. But anyway, that's why I chose the Eye of Cthulhu for number 12. At number 11, I chose Skeletron. Skeletron is one of the more iconic Terraria bosses, and it's for a good reason. Skeletron will spawn after interacting with the old man at the dungeon during the nighttime. Once the boss is defeated, you will have access to the dungeon. This boss is just really solid. In normal mode, this boss gives you a decision. You can either destroy both of his hands to weaken him, or you can just go right for his head. But in expert and master mode, you pretty much need to go for the hands first due to the high defense. Anyway, Skeletron doesn't have good drops other than the Book of Skulls, which only has about a 10.5% chance of dropping in normal mode. Even though this boss has practically no good drops, it's still a great time, and that's why I chose it for number 11. At number 10, I chose the Queen Slime. Now, I don't have a ton to say about this boss other than it's an enormous improvement upon King Slime. This boss is colorful, unique, really entertaining, and overall just a fun time. Its drops are also pretty good too. This mount is super fast and can be insanely useful if you know how to use it. Not only that, but the armor set you get from this boss allows you to basically use any class you want, which is really nice. Overall, this is a fun boss and a huge step in the right direction compared to King Slime. I like this boss, and I don't really have anything bad to say about it, and that's why I chose Queen Slime for number 10. At number 9, I chose Queen Bee. Now, there is one downside to this fight that I want to bring up real quick. The fact that you need to create a massive open space before you fight it is kind of irritating, especially since you need to do this in pre-hard mode when your mining speed is less than ideal. The best strategy is to just throw bombs everywhere, I guess. Anyway, that's not a huge issue, but it does add to Terraria's grindy nature. The boss itself is pretty awesome though. Queen Bee is super fun and decently challenging. Also, her drops are really good. The bee's knees being my favorite one. I really like the Queen Bee. I think it's very solid, but there are better fights in the game, but that's why I chose her for number 9. At number 8, I chose the Destroyer, the first of 3 mechanical bosses on this list. I think this is a great fight. There is 2 semi-issues that I have with it though. First of all, the fight is really cheesable. No matter how many times they nerf the Daedalus Stormbow, it will always destroy the Destroyer. Even weapons like the Meteor Staff will demolish this thing. Also, the drones that spawn can be pretty annoying. They're literally everywhere and it feels like you're playing laser tag. That being said, there are also 2 things I absolutely love about this boss. The first thing is the noise this boss makes when he gets damaged. It's so satisfying and I don't know why. Another thing I love is the fact that if this boss hits you head on, it does massive damage. I think this is a really cool trait for this boss to have. Also, defeating this boss gives you Souls of Might, which is required to craft one of my favorite weapons in the game, the Mega Shark. Anyway, I think this is yet again another great boss fight and it's a big improvement from the Eater of Worlds, so that's why I chose it for number 8. At number 7, I chose the Wall of Flesh. This is the boss you fight in order to initiate hard mode. I think it's a really great one too. It's not perfect or anything, but it's still a great fight that has some absolutely essential drops. I don't really have much else to say. I like the concept of the wall slowly closing in, and I think this boss provides a pretty decent challenge. I think this is a great Terraria boss. There's just not much else to say about it other than it's a giant wall with 2 eyeballs and a mouth. So that's why I chose it to be number 7. At number 6, I chose Skeletron Prime. This boss takes everything the original Skeletron had and improves it. Skeletron Prime is a mechanical quadruple... I can't even say that. Skeletron Prime is a mechanical quadruple wielding menace that honestly reminds me of General Grievous from Star Wars. But what do I know? Star Wars is overrated after all. Anyway, this boss is just really good. My favorite part is how he occasionally spins his head around in order to do an insane amount of damage, which was something that the original Skeletron could do as well, but it's definitely more of a threat in this fight. Also, each of his hands has a different kind of method for attacking, which is awesome. They could have easily just given him 4 hands that acted in the same way, but they took the time to really make this boss great. There's not anything absolutely incredible about Skeletron Prime, but I can't name a single flaw with this fight. I guess his drops aren't as good as the other mechanical bosses, but then again, that's up for debate. Either way, this boss is really good and honestly pretty underrated. And as you can tell, we're starting to get into the cream of the crop when it comes to bosses in this game. Anyway, for all those reasons, I chose Skeletron Prime for number 6. Starting off the top 5, I chose the twins. Before we begin, I just want to say that if I sound different, that's probably because I think I have a slight cold. Either that or just bad allergies. Anyway, remember a few minutes ago when I was talking about the Eye of Cthulhu? The twins is essentially the Eye of Cthulhu except 2 times as good. Get it? Because you're fighting 2 eyeballs instead of 1. Jokes aside, this is one of the best bosses in the game. One of the coolest features about this fight is the strategy. The 2 eyeballs are called Retinazer and Spasitism. To sum them up as quickly as possible, Retinazer shoots lasers and Spasitism is acid breath. The player is provided with a choice on which one to take out first, depending on their preference. I usually take out Spasitism first since I find him to be the most difficult, or you could try to damage both of them at the same time if you're trying to get your ass kicked. The reason you want to take out one at a time is because you most likely don't want both of them in second stage at once. Anyway, this all sounds really complicated, but to be honest, this fight isn't really that difficult, but it's still a decent challenge. This boss is just so fun though. The attacks are all super fun to dodge, and this is just a quality video game boss fight no matter how you slice it. So for those reasons, I chose the twins for number 5. At number 4, I chose Plantera. Plantera is one of the most iconic bosses in Terraria, and one of my personal favorites. This boss has it all. It's a cool concept, it's challenging, it's iconic like I said, it has great drops, its boss theme is arguably the best one in the game, so there is a lot of positives to this fight, and there aren't really any negatives either. I will say, I made this point when talking about the Queen Bee, so I guess it's only fair to mention it here, but you do have to create a massive underground arena before fighting this boss. boss. It's not as bad though, because at this point in the game, your mining speed should be pretty good. Another thing I will mention is a weapon called the True Excalibur. As of update 1.4.4, the True Excalibur is really good and really easy to obtain right before Plantera, and this sword absolutely wrecks this boss. Plantera can barely even touch you with this thing. But this isn't really a flaw with the boss, it's more of a flaw with this weapon being a little broken. Anyway, all you need to know is that Plantera is an awesome boss, so that's why I chose it for number 4. And coming in at number 3, I chose the Moonlord. The Moonlord is the final boss in Terraria, which means after you defeat this guy, you have officially beaten the game. And wow, the Moonlord is an absolutely fantastic final boss. Now before I begin talking about this guy, I need to mention that as I'm making this video, Terraria is still in version 1.4.4, and a few days ago we got confirmation that a brand new Moonlord sprite is coming in 1.4.5. It looks a lot better in my opinion. So if you're watching this in the distant future, the Moonlord you're seeing on screen right now is a little bit different than what he looks like in modern day. Just thought that was worth mentioning. Anyway, the Moonlord is a phenomenal boss. He's very challenging, he's pretty unique, his boss theme is also pretty good too. There's not much to dislike about him in my opinion. I guess some people might not like the massive beams that are almost impossible to avoid, but I find this fight to just be so incredibly entertaining. His drops are awesome too, although they don't really matter considering this is the final boss. Still, I think this is an incredible boss, and I actually had him at number 1 on this list for a while, but I came to the conclusion that there are actually 2 bosses that slightly beat out this boss, so for those reasons I chose the Moonlord for number 3. Coming in at number 2, I chose the Empress of Light. I'm gonna be completely honest, before making this video, I didn't really care about the Empress of Light. After all, in my opinion, there really is no incentive to go out of your way to fight it, considering that this is an optional boss that doesn't really have incredible drops or anything. But then, I had to fight this boss in order to get footage for this video, and oh my goodness is it amazing. This fight is absolutely phenomenal. It's not as iconic as the other Terraria bosses, so I immediately wrote it off as irrelevant, but this boss doesn't need to be iconic to be better than every other fight in the game, other than the number 1 spot of course. Regardless, this is one of the best bosses this game has to offer. Even though it isn't important for progression, it's got a lot of positives. The concept is unique, the soundtrack slaps, the fight itself is ridiculously fun and super challenging. The list just goes on and on and on. Also, this is a side note, but is this boss supposed to be based on one of Terraria's leading developers, Senex? I don't know why, but I just get that impression. I also see a lot of similarities between this boss and the Radiance from Hollow Knight. Honestly, the Empress of Light might be better than the Radiance. Regardless, the Empress of Light is an amazing video game boss fight. However, I do think there is one more Terraria boss fight that beats it out. And coming in at number 1, the best boss fight in all of Terraria, I chose Duke Fishron. I don't even know where to start. This boss fight is literally perfection. Duke Fishron has literally everything you would want out of a video game boss fight, but let's just go over them just to be sure. For starters, the concept itself is awesome. He's like a pig, a shark, and a bucket of green paint combined. Yeah, it's just as weird as it sounds, but it just works. What next? Oh yeah, this is one of the hardest bosses in the game. This boss is incredibly challenging. Sure, you can kind of cheese it by using Master Ninja gear combined with an arena made of asphalt blocks, but do you care? Because I don't. And even though this is an optional boss fight, his drops are so incredibly good that you probably don't want to skip fighting him. Duke Fishron also recently got his own boss music, which only makes the experience that much better. He also has some really cool signature moves. He can summon Sharknadoes to obstruct your path, and his final stage in expert mode is awesome as well. There's just absolutely nothing to dislike about him. Maybe if you really don't like bosses that do high damage, I could understand, but I really don't think there's an objective argument to be made against this boss. It's simply the greatest boss fight in all of Terraria, and I think it always will be. Duke Fishron really is that guy. He's awesome, and for some reason, I didn't originally have him at number 1, but at least I noticed my mistake. It's really no competition. Duke Fishron is the best boss in the game without a shadow of a doubt in my mind. Anyway, I think I got the point across. So for all those reasons, I chose Duke Fishron for number 1. So there you have it. That was my ranking of every major Terraria boss. Now, I understand there's probably a few hot takes on this list, like putting the Lunatic Cultist ahead of Golem, but I don't expect everyone to completely agree with this ranking. So now what I want to do is give my thoughts on what I think about this game's bosses as a whole. I think that Terraria's bosses are almost all entertaining at the least. I don't think they're absolutely breathtaking or anything, but I think almost all of them are quality boss fights that provide the player with a fun time. This game has some really really good boss fights, but I think at the grand scheme of things, Terraria's boss fights are consistently pretty good. Bosses aren't Terraria's main focus, but they are incredibly important to progression, so it's great that we have so many really good bosses. So that's what I think about Terraria's boss fights. Not groundbreaking or anything, but they'll always be a good time. Oh, also, one more thing. There's rumors going around that a new boss will be added to the game in the next update. The leading theory being that it'll be the concierge from a game called Dead Cells. This boss isn't confirmed, but if it does come to the game, I'll have a pinned comment down below giving my thoughts about it. Anyway, this video took a long time to make, so leaving a like would be greatly appreciated. Also, more videos just like this one will be made in the future, so why not subscribe? Let me know down in the comments what is your favorite Terraria boss and what changes would you make to this list. That's it for this video. I'll talk to you again soon.